Michael is joining us today to discuss integrating nature into the suburban landscape. Michael is a landscape consultant, designer, contractor who helps people incorporate water and nature into their landscapes through rain gardens and naturalistic planting design. Michael enjoys sharing his gardening knowledge on Instagram and Facebook, and in 2020 authored a rain garden book titled The Modern Rain Garden to help people tackle their own landscape projects with confidence. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and Michael, you can take it away from there.
Thank you, Sheila. Hello, everybody. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm particularly excited about this one because this is the first time that I'm going to be sharing what's going on at my new place that my wife and I just moved into in August. So if you've seen one of my presentations before, I often use my own, I call it headquarters, right, where I live, where I work out of, to kind of be a little bit of a laboratory for all the things that I'm trying out and all the techniques that I want to do. So because we got the place so recently, I haven't really done anything. So a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today are my latest considerations for what I'm looking to do. So I really wanted to make today about kind of bringing you guys into what I consider and what I prioritize when I plan my own landscape, because that's how I approach every landscape that I work on. I basically plan other people's landscapes or help them plan their own landscapes like it's my own, using kind of my own set of priorities mixed with their priorities. So we'll get a firsthand look at that here. I'm super excited, and we'll get started. So this is a little bit about my background, and I like to include this list because it gives people a sense of my background and the things that I was studying before I became a landscape consultant, designer, contractor. That was never my intention to do that. That's just kind of where these things led me, because I realized that there is, in my opinion, no profession on earth that has more of a impact on the earth than those that design, maintain, and build landscapes, because landscaping is just that ultimate connection to nature. What you do one day has a direct result the next day and for years and years and years. So learning about the environment, learning about earth processes is what led me to what I'm doing now. And this was kind of the main concept that I learned, that I still apply. Like basically my entire business revolves around this concept here of what happens to water, what happens to rain as we urbanize a landscape. So you can see, moving from left to right, what I really want to make note of here, if you can see my cursor, is the difference between runoff in a natural setting and the difference between runoff in a more impervious or a more urbanized setting. Right, so we can see the runoff volumes are increasing and the groundwater volumes are decreasing. It's pretty much a straight flip. So from 10% and 50%, now you basically have 50 and 15. So this is the main way that I integrate nature into the landscape. Is I want to reverse this process and create little pockets where we can absorb water into the ground, because as we all know, we live on the blue planet. Without water, we don't have life. So water is, as I see it, the lifeblood of nature, of the earth. So if we can start with being good stewards for water, then everything else will start to fall into place. And I really want to make the distinction between rain and stormwater, because when you think about rain, right, it's crisp, it's clear, it's been so hot for so long. Finally, we get the rains. You know, there's a reason that rain dances are a thing, because it is literally the giver of life. And then when you contrast that with stormwater, what comes to mind is, you know, it's dirty, it's toxic. You don't want to touch it. You certainly don't want to drink it. It's the opposite of healthy, right? So I try to encourage people to keep water as rain and not allow it to become stormwater, because one produces life, the other will say it does not. So again, just another illustration here of what my priorities are. Is I want to, within this, you know, typical suburban lot, I want to maintain what's called pre-development water cycle. So I want more infiltration. I want more groundwater recharge. I want less runoff, right? I want to create a situation where evapotranspiration is happening naturally through the soil, through plants, and through leaves. So biomass, biodiversity, these are all really big keys to achieving that. So again, we're trying to create a situation where we have pre-development hydrology in a post-development world. And that's kind of the root of what I do. Within Landscape Ontario, it's called fusion landscaping. And I'm going to be leaning into this term because this year I'm actually going to be teaching the fusion landscaping course with Landscape Ontario. What I like to call it is rainscaping. It's landscaping with rain at the focus, which is, of course, what we're talking about today. So fusion landscaping, rainscaping, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. You've also heard low impact development or green infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure. These are essentially different names for the same thing. So they're landscape and horticultural enhancements designed to reduce runoff while enhancing local biodiversity and fostering sustainability over the long term. So most of these have infiltrating water, managing rainwater and soils at the site instead of shedding water and soils off-site. So however you want to look at it, where a typical kind of early century landscaping was form and function were kind of the only two considerations, but in the fusion landscaping world, it's form, function, and environment carrying equal weight consideration-wise across what you're trying to do. So the suburban landscape, this is a quote that I got from Doug Tallamy. I'm sure many of you know who he is. Bringing Nature Home, Nature's Best Hope. These are some of the books that he's written. I believe he works in Delaware. He's huge on integrating nature into the landscape via native species. So he says, in the past, we've asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. This quote really reminds me of my grandparents, because one set of my grandparents were subsistence farmers in dry southern Italy, and their options were basically find a way to put water in the ground when it rains so we can grow crops, or we're all going to starve. And the other side of my family, my mom's side, is European British, and their form of landscaping was let's collect plants from wherever, doesn't matter where they're from, doesn't matter what they do, doesn't matter what feeds on them. Let's just create a little collection of plants that looks nice so we can have a nice looking yard. You can tell that both of those, for different reasons, put the human enjoyment or the human sustenance as the center of the landscape, where now we're kind of transitioning back to the more ancient ways where we're putting environment at the focus, and then human enjoyment comes as a result of making nature the star, putting nature at the focus. So that's what we do. And if you haven't already guessed, there is a big kind of permaculture reference throughout what I'm doing here, because permaculture and rainscaping are very much intertwined. And I always say that the goal is not to create a garden. The goal is to create an ecosystem, right? Because a garden, again, that is only like aesthetic enjoyment of the individual, where the ecosystem is placing priority not on the human, but on everything else. So if something's not eating the plants in your garden, then your garden is not part of the ecosystem. I lean into things eating my plants. I use clover in my landscape as a way to encourage rabbits to have a place to eat, right? So that's just one of the many ways where nature is at the focus. So I like to say something is always growing, dying, flowering, decomposing, eating, thriving, struggling, and competing. And these last two, struggling and competing, are very important because in the natural world, struggle and competition are very important. Think about raising a child. If you want that child to be successful, a big part of success is getting used to competition, is struggling against their peers and finding the best within themselves. And plants are no different. So if we constantly try to create a situation where no plants are competing with one another, we want to limit competition, we don't want them struggling, then plants don't reach their full potential. Maybe they don't flower on time. Maybe they don't produce the right color, or their pollen becomes different, right? Struggle and competing is very, very important. So I always lean into that. Biomass, biodiversity, pack everything in tight, and foster healthy competition. We'll see that as we continue on here. And this photo I really, really like, because when we talk about dying and decomposing, that is so huge, and it's one of the main things that I see people eliminating from their landscape is they want to eliminate, whether it's leaves or dead wood or brush, leave that in the landscape because that is what essentially is sustaining the landscape. I always look at what's happening in nature, in the forest, right? In a natural system, are there people going in or animals going in and taking the wood away? No, of course not. The wood is left to decompose, and that it becomes the main bedrock of the ecosystem, and that is the main thing that is giving nutrients back into the ecosystem so it can all be recycled. So if we can find ways to incorporate dead, decomposing, decaying wood into the landscape, you're already ahead of the game. So here we get into last HQ. This is a small East Mountain bungalow. And here we have what the conditions were like when we moved in. We've got, this is the house, porch up, concrete walkway, deck, little vegetable garden here with a shed in the back, and 2 connected downspouts. You can see these red X's with blue representing where water was actually getting into the landscape. So the main thing that I look at when I look at any landscape that I'm consulting on is the roof. How is it draining water? Where are the downspouts? Because if water is going to be the focus, we got to go to the source, which is the roof. So this was the before. You can see the after here. You've built a big rain garden in the front and another rain garden back here. But we're going to focus on this one. I'm going to show you what this one looks like here. And this was actually a project with Hamilton Naturalist Club that we did in 2017. So it's really, really grown since then. It broke my heart to move out of this place, but we have since. You can see the berms around the edges, the rain gardens being dug in the front. The downspouts are in. If you look at the previous photo, notice how there's no downspouts. They're still connected. Once we got all that redone, now we have downspouts coming in, let it grow, and now we have something like this. So Green Venture actually did a really, really good video of this place. They came by and we kind of went over everything that's going on here. So that on their YouTube page is a really, really good look on this rain garden. This blank spot here being the central bowl where all of the water is being absorbed, of course, surrounded by plants. Now to the naked eye, this might look like a situation where I just let whatever happened happen, but this is actually a combination of letting nature take over and human will. So there's a lot of maintenance that goes into this. And this is probably my favorite shot of the garden that I got in all my years. What I love about it is there's so much biodiversity, there's so much biomass, there's no blank spaces. But when you look through the blank spaces, you can see it's not neat, right? There's leaves and sticks and decomposing this and pieces of old mulch and all different kind of things that are adding nutrients back into the system. So many different species here. I won't go through them all, but the rain garden. What is the rain garden? I take a 3-pronged approach at defining what it is. It's a shallow bowl-shaped planted area designed to capture and infiltrate water. The engine of the rain garden, well-draining, biologically active soil, native wildflowers, grasses, trees, and shrubs, pollinators, and habitat. I'm gonna take a drink. If anybody has any questions, or if we want to answer some right now, we can. But I'm just gonna take a quick drink here.
I did put in the chat for anyone interested a link to the virtual green infrastructure tour, which includes Avesi's HQ video. So if anyone's interested, they are welcome to check that out.
Okay, so this is the main driver behind the rain garden is the plants. It's the biodiversity. You can see plants are basically icebergs of the terrestrial world, right? Most of the biomass, most of what you see is actually underground. The fruiting bodies, the leafing bodies are really just what is presented to the world, where the underground organs, storage organs, feeding organs are really what the plant is. I always say when you buy a plant from the nursery and you put it in the ground, pay no mind to what the plant looks like. If it dies immediately, or I should say if it dies immediately, I honestly, I don't really care, because when I buy a plant, I'm not buying the green above ground portions. I'm buying the roots, right? So if the roots are still okay, the plant is fine. A lot of times they will sacrifice the green above ground material in order to put energy back into the roots so it can regrow again. So patience, patience, patience when it comes to plants and plantings. Take a very long-term approach. So the two basic approaches to rain gardens: excavate and replace everything, dig a giant pit, get the soil out of there, or scrape and shape, try to keep everything close to the surface. I prescribe to the second option. That's why my rain garden book is called Scrape, Shape, and Plant, the Modern Rain Garden Scrape, Shape, and Plant, because I want to encourage people to not be wasteful with how they use materials and not think that the job is going to be bigger than it is, because rain gardens and rain gardening is actually very, very simple. A lot of times it gets overcomplicated and overblown. So simple, simple, simple. Doesn't have to be deep, doesn't have to be a big excavation endeavor. And this is one of the main reasons. You can see the O and A horizons of this big soil profile. The darker it is, obviously, the more nutrients. So we want to try to keep this. We don't want to excavate out. When I see stuff like this, my heart gets broken. I don't understand why this would ever be necessary. You're taking a soil that's already developed, already built, and you're assuming that you can import another soil and replace it with something better. So I'll discourage people from doing this. So now we're on to current HQ, and still East Mountain raised bungalow. You can see here the three downspouts currently. They're all connected. So I have no downspouts that are actually draining onto the landscape. So of course, that's something I'm going to have to fix. We got a driveway here, steps up, step down, pool, concrete patio with a shed, big lawn spaces here, and a few little garden spaces here. You can see what I'm kind of considering here. I know that the eaves troughs and downspouts are going to have to be replaced because I want to find ways to get water into the front yard. I don't really. We'll see later. I'm hesitant to put more water in the backyard because this is already where water is kind of pooling and gathering. You can see these edges. They're like those deep cut edges, and every time it rains, water collects here and pools. So it turns this back area into a little bit of a soggy situation. So I'm saying, why don't we just lean into that, create a rain garden away from the fence? Because if there's a wooden fence here and there's water here, it's eventually going to be rotting out the fence. So let's lean into this moisture here and create a rain garden here with the water that's already falling in this area. So yeah, islands and continents. This is another concept that I like to consider. Is with this one here, we have these fragmented little spaces of gardens that just kind of exist throughout the landscape, right? I try to look at gardens as more continents, right? So I have a patch of lawn here and a big continent of garden. I've got a lawn space here. It's not fragmented. It's just one large lawn space with a big garden throughout here. So you take these little garden edges and you turn them into one continuous garden while still maintaining a large central lawn space for, lawn games or kids or dogs or whatever reason you have for wanting lawn. If you don't want lawn, you can eliminate it altogether. But I have a wife who likes lawn, so we have to compromise and find a little bit of lawn. So that's where my head is at with that one. This is a Google Maps street view of the house currently. One thing I want to point out right here, this I'm realizing is basically where the landscape, that this is the crux of the landscape, because this little extra roof here is creating a situation where I can't move water to the front because it's cut off, right? The water has to stay in the backyard unless I change something. So you can see here, there's a connected downspout back here, and I can't bring water to the front because there's no eaves trough here. And this eaves trough doesn't connect past here, it ends, right? So I have to find a way to bring water into the front. And you can see connected downspouts. These pictures were taken recently. As I was going through this presentation, I realized I hadn't taken any photos of my place. So you get the winter view, but as I present this landscape more and more, you will see summer views and what it looks like, guaranteed. If you follow me on Instagram or Facebook, I share all this as well. So you can see non-winter views that way. And this is actually a house in my neighborhood that I saw, and I said, okay, so this person has a little roof extension here with an eaves trough that goes all the way around. So this might be a good way for me to bring water to the front of the house and not have it abandoned in the backyard where there's nowhere for it to go except onto the concrete patio. So when I look around in my neighborhood and I see houses, I'm obsessed with how is the roof draining? Where's the water going? What is it? Where is it being drained to? So here's another thing that is unique to this house that I would never recommend that anybody do, and that is install a vegetable garden bed directly next to the house using your house as actually one of the walls. So I inherited this, and my wife loves it, of course, so I can't change it. So what I'm going to do is lean into it, and instead of planting plants in here that need a lot of water, I'm going to say, okay, what climate around Earth would resemble this kind of hot, dry, arid kind of landscape? And I'm thinking Mediterranean. So I'll use this as Mediterranean herbs, maybe some Mediterranean vegetables, maybe whether that's peppers or eggplants. Again, I have to look into how much water demand these plants have, but right now I'm thinking I'll use this as like a herb garden or like a tea garden, and knowing that I won't be putting supplemental water here. Whatever rain falls, that's what this place is going to get. And the planter was actually put here because the path of the sun follows this way, so this is going to be pretty much full sun all the time. And here is a look at the back corner where you can see this is kind of where those two garden edges meet, and the fence is kind of leaning because it's been underwater for so long that these fence posts are starting to rot out. So I'm going to create a rain garden over here, and instead of having the water sit up against the fence, and I'm going to create one big continuous garden and do away with these small little fragmented islands. And here's another one. This is the other side of the shed. This is actually the pool right here. And we have these two gigantic euonymus shrubs that are really one step away from plastic, the way I see it. This is not a shrub that is feeding anything in your garden. It's not really a shrub that's building soil. It is an exotic species that really is not part of the local ecology here in Southern Ontario. So this is a plant where anytime I see it, I know, okay, I have a really big opportunity here to replace this shrub with a native shrub, whether that's elderberry or dogwood or something like that, that can really bring more biodiversity to the site. And as I judge the Monarch Awards, right? So every year I see probably 10-ish houses on top of all the houses that I see in my landscaping life. But I've found that the shrub layer is probably the most ignored layer in terms of its benefit to biodiversity. It's really undervalued. People put a lot of emphasis on the plants, as in the wildflowers and the perennials, and then they skip the shrub layer, and then they say, okay, but well, what trees do we want? And I would really want to encourage people to look more at shrubs, because shrubs provide so much habitat, so much biodiversity, whether it's berries or flowers or seeds or whatever it might be. Birds and insects love shrubs, so lean into that. And these are some of the main considerations that I'm looking at right now. This is the kind of this is the after view that I've kind of marked up here to show, okay, these are the things that I'm considering. I think that the house might be, the roof area might be a little bit too big for just 2 downspouts, so I have to include a third one. Okay, do I want to put one here and maybe drop it into a rain barrel and then have it drain into this rain garden here? And if I do that, how am I going to maintain walking access here? Because I don't want to have like a pipe or a hose or a big creek bed that I can't walk over. So what am I going to do about that walking access through here? There's a swale between the two properties that I know that I can't change that. I can't alter that. This is municipal drainage infrastructure that the city actually can fine you if you fill in the swale, or if you change the drainage in any way that negatively affects yourself or your neighbors. So you got to maintain the liability there, and I encourage everybody to keep swales where they are. This one here, overflow for garbage or recycling. Because I'm going to be having a lot of water draining into this space here, I'm going to need some amount of room for overflow. So if this is full and it's still raining, it can get out. And I'm thinking here, but this is where I store my garbages and recycling. So do I move the overflow to over here? Do I integrate the overflow into the garbage and recycling pad? I'm not sure yet. This one here, tomatoes, I'm thinking tomatoes here because just like this is very sunny, this is also very sunny. This is actually where this is the spot where the planter bed is like built up against the house. Just in case you didn't know that, that's what that means there. And this here is right now is two, I'm not even sure what shrubs they are. They're two exotic shrubs that aren't really contributing to the native flora and fauna at all. So I'm thinking we'll replace this with tomatoes. It's right off kind of the kitchen steps there. So this might be a good spot for that. And the pool, I want to have plants around here. I want to put edibles into the landscape, but if I have a chlorine pool, and I have to be aware of the splash zone of the pool because I don't want chlorine water hitting plants or feeding plants that I know I'm going to eventually be consuming. I'm not sure if the chlorine is going to be affecting the fruit or the berries or whatever it might be. So for now, until I know more, I'm probably just going to steer clear of that altogether, and just lean into sacrificing this space for nature only. So this is not a space where I'm likely to plant things that I'm going to be eating. The other thing is a compost pit. I know I want to create a space for any brush or debris or leaves or anything that might come, even if I'm digging a hole and I have some spare soil. I don't like taking organic material that comes from the site and taking it off the site. I want to create a spot where I can kind of compost it and turn it into that incredible soil amendment, that black gold that is then going to help put nutrients back into the soil. So where am I going to do that? I'm not really sure. That's probably my main consideration right now, is I don't really have a great spot for compost. So if anybody has any ideas on this, I'm all ears. And then layered plantings. We talked about before, encouraging plants to share space, encouraging them to compete, encouraging them to struggle against each other, right? This is a concept that I found from the book Planting in a Post-Wild World from Thomas Reiner and Claudia West. I'll put a link to this book in the resources that I send to Sheila after this, so you'll be able to see that book. I have 2 copies myself, actually. It's a book that I literally just read this book all the time. It's basically my planting philosophy is in here. So this is basically the philosophy that they teach, is the design layers and the functional layers. So structural being tall grasses and tall perennials, and then shrubs and trees. Seasonal theme layer would be your your perennials. In this case, it's blazing star and Echinacea purpurea, and then the ground cover layer, which is, I'm sure by this time many of you are familiar with the green mulch, area of thinking, where instead of having wood chips as your mulch, you actually have plants as your mulch. So whether that's, for me, I like to use plants like clover, geranium, anemone, carex, sedges are big like this. So we want to create a matrix of plants that are constantly sharing space, constantly overlapping, so we can get as much biomass biodiversity in there, and we can suppress weeds, keep moisture in the soil, all that good stuff. So this is kind of the cross-section view of what you're looking at. The functional layers on the bottom layers, design layers on the top. So if you're looking at a landscape, you don't really see the functional layers. You really only see the design layers. That's why they're called that. So if we look at what is the difference between a functional layer and a design layer, functional layers would be your ground covers, right? It's less visible. It's not really the star of the show. It's very utilitarian. It's just there to provide the benefits. Low hummocky plants, they suppress weeds, retain moisture in the soil. It's that nursery layer, right? A lot of the times the perennials that are growing will come up later, and they need to be incubated by the earlier emergence of the ground cover layers or the functional layers, and it provides a little space for them to grow so that they can eventually surpass in height the functional layers. Builds soil, of course, and reduces erosion. Reducing erosion is a big key for me, because I'll show you right here actually. There's a little overhang here. The house overhangs by about 2 feet. And I noticed that as water hits the face of the house and drips down, it's bare soil here right now because I didn't put mulch down. I just, if I see a situation that I know I want to change it, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to just see how it operates for 6 months, and then I'll make a decision if I need to change it and how to change it. So what I noticed is as water cascades off the wall and hits the soil splashes up, and now the windows in that area are now full of dirt and debris. So I don't want to have to clean that all the time. I don't want to have to put down new mulch all the time. I want dense layer of plants to absorb that water, so the erosive force of the water is not hitting the soil, it's hitting the plants. And then we move into the design layers, and these are the taller structural plants, visually dominant layer. These are the plants that you actually see. We look at things like texture and color and seasonal themes, right? Some of them will come out guns blazing in the spring, and then you won't see them again until next spring. Some of them are long summer flowering plants, and then some of them, like some of my favorites are the asters and the goldenrods of the world, right? And those, you don't even see those flowers until in the fall. So the seasonality of it, of this plant blooms at this time, this plant blooms at this time, it's very important to consider that in the design layer. That's where that comes through. Aesthetic arrangement, of course, where they're going to be. This is where the concept of drifts comes in, right? Big patches. This also builds soil. Both of them build soil. Both of them reduce erosion. They're both kind of doing the same work in regards to that, but it's these first ones here that they're two sides of the same coin. One is helping the other do what the other one is doing best. And again, going over the two, design, functional, very important. This is basically how I come up with what plants I'm going to put in the landscape. It's all based on these categories. So this would be an example of some of the structural plants that I use. This would be an example of, if I'm planning a landscape, I'll break it down into structural plants, seasonal theme plants, and then ground covering plants. So black elderberry, I love. Red dogwoods, gray dogwoods, coated dogwoods, flowering dogwoods. Buttonbush is one of my favorites, especially because I'm a big rain garden guy. The buttonbush, Coelanthes occidentalis, is a really, really good one because it has such a unique flower. It's literally a white ball of flowers that lasts about 2 weeks. So that short duration of flowering time makes it that much more special. You say, oh, the buttonbush is in bloom, we have to enjoy it while it's here, because after that it's just going to be a brown ball, and it just kind of dissipates the way a dandelion would. So buttonbush is one I think it's really underutilized, really underappreciated, but I love it. And then a tall perennial, this one's not a shrub, the oxeye sunflower is another one that I would consider structural because it is so tall. This here is likely might even be undersized. You can get some oxeye sunflowers easily taller than me, into the 7, 8 feet range, depending on what kind of growing conditions you have, how much sun it's looking at. And the seasonal theme layers. These are the ones that get the most attention because these are the ones that produce the best flowers, that are the more known plants. So I love heath aster, little blue stem. I love grasses, little blue stems, and sedges, whether that's Carrick sedge, Pennsylvania sedge, fox sedge. I love the contrast between the petal of the leaf versus the blade of the grass. So that contrast there, I love working with that. Echinacea purpurea, purple coneflower, is another one of my favorites. White turtlehead, I love that one. That's also another very unique flower. The pink turtlehead also I like. I think one of them's native, one of them is not. Not exactly sure on that one, but I love turtleheads either way. They're a good rain garden plant because they can deal with lots of moisture, or they can deal with drought. So that's another thing about rain garden plants is I don't plant plants in there that are water loving or moisture loving. I plant plants in there that can deal with water when it's there, but they can also deal with drought when it's there, right? Because the point of the rain garden is you don't want to supplemental water it. You want the water that falls on it to be the only water that it gets. So when you say, oh, I want to plant wetland plants in the rain garden, the rain garden is not wet enough for long enough to support wetland plants. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but rain garden plants are more likely to be dry than wet. Aquilegia canadensis, columbine, I love. Lobelia cardinalis, this is a really, really special plant for me because it responds to disturbance really well. This is kind of like the hidden assassin of the flower world. You can have cardinal flower in a landscape, and for 2 years it's beautiful, and then you don't see it again for 5 years, and then your dog rips through the garden chasing a rabbit and disturbs up some soil, and then the next year you have cardinal flower again. So that's one of the reasons why I love packing the site with biomass and biodiversity. And as plants die off and move over here, that's all part of it. I don't try to control what that looks like. I just understand that this is nature at work. Nature is self-regulating smarter than I could go in and make my human assumptions of, oh no, this plant can't go here, it has to go there. Well, it's growing there, so it likes it there for a reason. That's where it has found its little niche. And then Leanthera spicata, blazing star. I mean, we all know that one. The tall purple spire of really irregular flowers is just beautiful. So that's another one that I use all the time. And then getting into the ground cover plants. Most of these I've already mentioned. White clover is pretty much a staple for me. I don't have a spread volume on it because that's like saying, what's the spread of Kentucky bluegrass? It's infinite. It's how much space do you have? That's how much it can spread. So I love white clover for that. It's very good at filling in little voids, and it has a little white flower that bees love when it's out. Geranium macrorhizum, big root geranium. I used to plant more Geranium maculatum, but I found it's a little bit tall and spindly, where the big root geranium is much more dense and hummocky. So it really provides that ground cover function a little bit better than the maculatum, I find. But of course, there's a time and place for every plant. Canada anemone is probably my favorite ground covering plant. In 6 years, I can probably count using my fingers the amount of times I've planted a landscape without using Canada anemone. It's pretty much a staple for me. I love it. A lot of people shy away from it because it's an aggressive spreading ground cover. I lean into it because it's an aggressive spreading ground cover. I want the ground to be filled. I want the soil to be having new pop-ups of anemone and flowers all the time. And if you have to manage it, you have to manage it. But if you create a situation where you have another aggressive ground cover against it, it can kind of be like a clash of the titans situation, and they can self-regulate themselves. Again, that's where the competition aspect comes into it. Carex Pennsylvania, I love this one. If it's a shady space, Pennsylvania is pretty much a lock for me. Carex bebii, I love that one too. Bebii is one that I like to plant them in many, many different ways. Carex bebii is one that on its own, it looks really cool. It's kind of this contrast between all the other plants because it's a very unique sedge. But then if you plant, say, 3 to 5 bebiis together, it creates this really cool, like clumpy, hummocky kind of like situation that's very unique, and you don't see a whole lot. So that just comes with planting plants and looking at them and seeing them and studying them, and you'll start to see this one goes there and it reacts to this situation this way. So there's many, many more plants here that I plant typically, but this is just kind of the Coles Notes version of what kind of plants I like to plant. And that's going to be the end of it for me. I did want to share my book with you. It reached #1 in the landscape gardening category earlier in the year in January. So I was super proud about that. The support for it has been awesome. If you want to buy the book on Amazon, it's there. A lot of people don't like to support Amazon. So I have author copies with me that you can also buy it from me. So that's up to you guys. Thank you so much for having me, and any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.